Well, everyone knows how the Vietnam War ended. It ended in American defeat, total collapse, crisis, chaos. We know that tens of thousands of U.S. troops were killed in that war, a war that didn't need to happen, a war that millions of Americans were opposed to. And we know that hundreds of thousands, over 300,000 American troops were injured in that conflict. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have learned from the lessons of the Vietnam War, any war that we've had since in the United States. But apparently we are in the books for a reiteration, probably one that's going to be far worse, of that very war. We know that Donald Trump is open to the idea of sending U.S. troops on the ground in Iran. Every single media outlet in the United States has said as much, as well as Israeli media, probably the people who want U.S. troops on the ground the most. But we got news this week that Donald Trump has decided to send 2,500 U.S. Marines en route to the Middle East. They landed in Singapore yesterday, and now they're making their way to the region. No one knows what they're doing, what the goal is. There's a lot of talk about the possibility of taking a Karg Island, which we'll discuss more in a second. But what we do know is that over 2,500 U.S. Marines are currently en route, and their families are very concerned. Now, I just said we know how the Vietnam War came to an end, but a lot of people don't know how the Vietnam War started. Would you be surprised to find out that the Vietnam War began the same exact way? The United States decided to send a Marine Expeditionary Unit of 3,500 troops to a place called Da Nang in South Vietnam, which went on to become the staging ground for U.S. troops in the south of Vietnam. By the end of the year, after they sent these first Marines to Vietnam, there was a grand total of over 160,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam, many of whom went on to die or to be injured in this war, in this illegal, unjust war. The same exact thing is happening now. It doesn't matter that millions of Americans oppose this war on Iran. It doesn't matter that we know that more Americans will die. It doesn't matter that their families and many of those who are getting sent off to the front line right now are very worried. They don't want to fight in a war for Netanyahu or Israel, and they definitely don't want to participate in more massacres like the Manab Elementary School massacre. They are getting sent into what can be only described as a suicide mission. And I pray for all of those troops. I pray for the Iranians. I pray for everyone involved. But make no mistake about it, those U.S. troops who are currently stationed in and around the region and across the world, they do have a choice. They have a legal choice they can make. They can consciously object, or they can decide to participate in this mess. But what we do know is it's not going to end well. We know that the American government doesn't care about the health, well-being, or safety of the troops which are getting sent to the region right now. If they did care about those troops, they wouldn't be sending them on a venture like securing Karg Island, which is just a few miles off the coast of Iran's mainland. It's an island so small you can walk across it in 45 minutes. And for what? Yeah, Iran does 90% of their oil exports through this island, but we know for a fact that Iran has plenty of other alternatives to ship their oil. They've shipped 10 million barrels of oil since the war began, and they are making record profits in the process. How are they doing that? Well, they have land transfer of oil. They have ship-to-ship transfer at sea. They have plenty of other alternatives. They have been preparing for this eventuality that the U.S. would try to take, or they would bomb Karg Island for many, many years, decades, actually. So what's the purpose of sending 2,500 troops to go and potentially take Karg Island? I happen to believe that the whole purpose is to get a bunch of U.S. troops unalived and what will undoubtedly be a ridiculous, non-strategic move that will only justify the further deployment of U.S. troops to the region. Call it a false flag, call it a bad strategy, call it Netanyahu's favorite plan. I don't know what you want to call it, but that will undoubtedly be the end result. Bunch of U.S. troops on a tiny island with no cover whatsoever, A government and a military that have not learned the lessons of the Ukraine war. They haven't learned just how deadly amphibious landings are in today's day and age. They haven't learned how deadly FPV drones can be in today's age. And this is going to result in absolute disaster. But again, they don't care. They don't care. If they did care, they'd be following in suit of people like Joe Kent, the director of national counterterrorism, who resigned just yesterday, less than 24 hours ago. Apparently, we're going to be getting a conversation with him and Tucker Carlson tonight. They'll be discussing solutions, a roadmap, American path to getting out of this messy war on Iran, which we all know is not going well. I don't know what solutions could be offered at this late stage. The Iranians surely are not having any sort of ideas of a ceasefire. In fact, the foreign minister of Iran, Mr. Arakchi, today, he said, ceasefires, temporary ceasefires, these are only for nations that cannot avenge the fallen. What does that tell you? It tells you that no one in Iran, even the reformists, even the people that pursued the Iran deal years ago, are not interested in peace at the moment. They understand that Israel, the United States, and the allies all across the region who claim they're not involved in this conflict, but we know they are intent on total destruction and regime change in Iran. They're looking for their Delcy Rodriguez, but all they're really doing is creating a Kim Jong-un in Tehran. Well, we know for a fact that many in the U.S. White House are not happy with this war. In fact, according to Joe Kent, he said, Iran did not pose an immediate threat. We started the war under pressure from Israel and its lobby. This is a man who lost his wife fighting against ISIS in Syria. This is a man who's deployed all across the world, fought the U.S. regime's wars in the most unthinkable conditions. But even war on Iran is a step too far for him. What does that tell you? We have countless reports from Axios with insider sources today saying that many in the Trump administration feel as though there is no way out. And they're very concerned about that. Frankly, I'm surprised that Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has not followed in suit behind her underling, Joe Kent, and resigned as of yet. Tulsi Gabbard is someone who I used to know. I've spoken to several times. I thought she ran a very impressive campaign for the presidency of the United States years ago. In fact, during that campaign, she published videos talking about how there needs to be no war on Iran. She sold T-shirts on her own website, which said no war on Iran. She co-signs the No War on Iran Act in the United States Congress while she was running for president. But now she's doing the regime's bidding. She is choosing to ignore the sane minds in the administration or jumping ship, and she is going along to get along with the regime in this illegal war, which will result undoubtedly in many more of her fellow soldiers dying in a pointless conflict. We'll see what happens with Tulsi Gabbard. We'll see if she decides to wake up, but I'm not holding my breath any way, shape, or form. Well, the question then becomes, what is next for the United States? What is next for Israel? What is next for the Iranians? Well, for the United States, I don't think things are going to get all that much better. Joe Kent's going on Tucker Carlson, exposing just how bad it really is. I think a lot of Americans will have a big wake-up call as to just how much the U.S. government is working in the disservice of our nation, of our economic interests, of the health and well-being of our troops and American citizens all across the world. But it's not just that, of course. We saw today that the United States and Israel did joint attacks on Iran's major gas refineries and facilities in the south of Iran. Now, the Iranians have promised that if their gas facilities are attacked, they know what they're going to do immediately. They are going to launch attacks on all of the oil and gas facilities across the region. In fact, they've actually listed which ones they're going to be hitting. They have no problem listing which facilities they will be hitting because, of course, all the air defenses of these GCC countries are in the gutter, nowhere to be found, just like the Iron Dome. for the American people, they will soon feel the pain of what it means to have these GCC countries' oil and gas assets targeted. We'll see huge increases at the pump. To my friends in the United States, I said, go fill your car one last time while you still can, before only the rich and famous have the ability to fill their cars. Right now, oil prices are through the roof. Gas prices are up 26% since the war began, and it is only going to get worse. But I don't really think Trump cares about whether or not the American people can afford their gas. I don't think he cares about whether Americans are dying in this conflict. And I don't think he really cares even about projecting power at this point, because he can't. They're talking about going and getting Kharg Island. He's begging European nations and China, oddly enough, to come and free the Strait of Hormuz. But there is not a single U.S. aircraft carrier, not a single U.S. carrier strike group within 700 kilometers of the Iranian coast. The USS Gerald R. Ford, they had a major fire. No one really knows why. According to Al-Mayadeen, that fire broke out as a result of mutiny on board the ship. And I'm not surprised. This is the same group of sailors which were shoving their undershirts down into the pipes, into the toilets of the USS Gerald R. Ford before the war began. And as a result of that, they had to take the ship into dock in Greece because the plumbing faced a major issue. Now we're seeing reports that actually there was not just a spontaneous combustion on board the USS Gerald R. Ford. No, what actually happened was the sailors, probably knowingly, probably on purpose, had a little bit of mutiny and decided that they were going to, in fact, allow a fire to break out in the laundry room. Laundry fires are a big problem on military vessels, especially on submarines. Everyone knows this, and they can cause a lot of damage. Apparently, there were 3 U.S. sailors who were injured as a result of this fire. 600 sailors on board that ship had to sleep on the floor because of the aggressive amounts of smoke that were plaguing their cabins. And now the ship is headed over to Greece. The USS Abraham Lincoln, they claim, just decided to leave the territorial waters one day. The Iranians claim, however, that as a result of 3 different attacks on the USS Abraham Lincoln, at least one of which was successful in hitting its target, the USS Abraham Lincoln had to flee over 1,000 kilometers away to avoid being hit, struck, even sunk by the IRGC forces. The U.S. Air Force is no different. We know what's gone on there. All of the main beacons of U.S. military might that they parade around the world are coming to an absolute collapse. And I should also add that that includes not just the U.S. Navy, not just the U.S. Air Force, it also includes the U.S. dollar. We know that the Iranians have a stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, but we have seen them allow for certain ships to enter and exit the Strait of Hormuz. We know that a Pakistani ship labeled Karachi was able to leave the Strait of Hormuz because the oil on board the ship was paid for in the petro yuan. In fact, the Iranians have a new idea for the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians are coming out and announcing that in the future, the Strait of Hormuz situation will not return to its pre-war status. That's a clear indication, as I've ever seen, that the Strait of Hormuz will not be a safe ground for those who uphold the petrodollar and the global reserve currency that is known as the U.S. dollar. We are in a new world, and the Iranians are not afraid to challenge the United States, and it makes a lot of sense. The Iranians, their highest power is the one, the only, Allah, the God above, and that's why the U.S. is attacking all of these religious figures and clerics in Iran. The Iranians understand, though, that the highest power for those in the United States, specifically the highest power for those on Wall Street and in Washington, D.C., is not God, not one God above, but it is the U.S. dollar. That is who they worship. It's what they worship. And by attacking U.S. interests in the region, by attacking the Strait of Hormuz, by attacking all of the oil and gas assets of the GCC countries, they are able to do much more damage to the United States as God than the U.S. can do to any sort of religious authority inside of Iran. We also heard from the Iranian spokesperson of the IRGC today that you attacked our infrastructure and energy in the south, referring to the gas infrastructure. Now your infrastructure, energy, and gas facilities will burn to ashes at the first opportunity. That was a red line for the Iranians, which we're now seeing play out. Today's strikes on the gas facilities in Iran immediately brought the flow of electricity into Iraq to a screeching halt. Iraq immediately lost 3,200 megawatts of energy as a result of the U.S.-Israeli attacks on the gas fields in southern Iran. But make no mistake about it, it's not going to get any easier for those in the Gulf countries because the Iranians have already laid out a series of targets. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there are 2 different refineries and petrochemical complexes which they have announced they will target. In the United Arab Emirates, the Al Hassan gas field will be targeted. And in Qatar, the Ras Laffan refinery, phases 1 and 2, will also be targeted. These will not just be symbolic targets either. The Iranian military spokesperson gave a statement just about an hour ago. He said, you attacked our infrastructure and energy in the south. Your infrastructure, energy, and gas facilities will burn to ashes at the first opportunity. Your era of glory is now over. Withdraw from the region or choose the alternative. And he didn't actually say the alternative. I'm just not going to say what he actually said because I don't want to get Mr. Galloway's YouTube channel in trouble. Very strong words coming from the Iranians, and they are acting upon the threats. As we sit here right now, Saudi Arabia has come under repeated attacks by the Iranians. There are massive explosions going off all across Saudi Arabia, primarily in Riyadh. But it's not just Riyadh. We're also seeing attacks on the United Arab Emirates. We're seeing renewed attacks by Iran and the Lebanese resistance on Israel once more. And Trump can do absolutely nothing about it. There's nothing he can do about it. We'll be talking about that more with our guest tonight because one of our guests is actually an expert on these matters. One of our guests has served in these conflicts, and he understands just how cornered the United States is right now and how far they're willing to go to justify massive troop deployments to the region to try and make this another endless forever war. I don't know about you guys, but I was born in 1999, and I've seen my fair share of conflicts that the U.S. has claimed they would have total victory in. We saw Iraq. Well, Iraq today has a bunch of Iranian militias, and it looks like the U.S. embassy and bases there are on their last legs. They're about to get kicked out. We saw Afghanistan. After 20 years, the U.S. failed to replace the Taliban government with anyone but the Taliban. We saw the attacks on Yemen, which I was present for in Yemen. The U.S. went running away after their fighter jets fell to the bottom of the Red Sea. And somehow or another, the U.S. thought that despite the fact that they couldn't defeat Ansar Allah in Yemen, they should try Iran. It's not going to go any better. It's going to go much worse. It's going to be a lot more hairy, a lot more ugly. And frankly, I'm a little bit scared about how ugly it might get. As the resignation of Joe Kent comes, that could only mean one thing: either a ground invasion, massive endless war, a false flag, or possibly nukes. We'll be discussing all of this more with our guests tonight, Che Bose and Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. We'll be right back after a brief break. Thank you so much.